glad to be hosting our first international guests, Jeroen and Jakob. Jeroen leads your Salesflare, and Jakob leads YourSales. You guys must have already stalked them a little bit on LinkedIn, and also had a look at their companies and probably used their softwares as well. And if you haven't, then I'm sure by the end of this session you are going to be, because Salesflare is something that EngineerBabu completely runs on, and YourSales is something that we are looking to adopt very soon. So over to you guys.
So I'm Jeroen, co-founder and CEO of Salesflare. Salesflare is a easier and more automated CRM system for small businesses. We have some awesome customers like EngineerBabu, who have been with us for quite a while now, using us with a bunch of people to organize their sales better. You can think of our system as one that automatically keeps track of a lot of the things you're doing, instead of the usual CRM where you have to update things manually all the time, which nobody in the end does. So that's sort of where we make the difference.
All right, is that over to me?
Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Jakob. I'm with YourSales, which I run and founded like 12 years ago, something like that. And what we do is that we help tech companies in particular expand sales in any corners of the world. And we've been working on 5 continents so far, where we do lead generation or deal closing for any of our primarily software as a service based clients from all sorts of industries. So we're where Jeroen provides a critical piece of the sales tech stack. We're the ones who go and have fun and use that out in closing deals.
Cool. Let me now figure out how this screen sharing works. Not a lot of people have introduced themselves yet in the chat. So Akansha put a comment there to ask you guys to do it. I just see Lolita from the Philippines coming in.
Right, guys, please be a little bit more introduce yourselves so that we know who you guys are. Don't feel shy. I know a lot of people do feel intimidated, but just keep introducing yourselves and we'll be happy to, take your questions later on as well. So, right, people are starting now.
Cool.
And we also put in what problems you're facing with sales, remote sales, so that, they can advise you better.
Exactly. Cool. I will start sharing my screen. I think it's this one. No, it's not that one. Sorry. Then the other one. This tab. Yes. Do you all see the presentation right now?
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Any questions we should answer before going into the presentation? I don't see any challenges coming up yet. So I guess we'll start and then we can pick up some of these questions later. When to stop pushing clients for closure?
In the chat, and they can drop in their questions over there.
Yeah. We'll get to the closure question. I hope to pick it up later when we get to that section. It's certainly something we can cover there. The title of our presentation is How to Sell Remotely in Times of COVID-19 and Beyond. 2020 started as a beautiful year without many of us thinking that what would all happen. But then came this nasty virus, which sort of separated us all. We all started to social distance, started to make these funny rows at, this is a fries place in Belgium. That's a thing we do, eating French fries. Actually, we hate it when you say French fries. We prefer you to call it Belgian fries because they're actually Belgian. But that's a whole other story. It started having an effect on the way people behave with each other and the distance they take. There's really, like, if you look at the way we interact, sort of an old way and a new way. And this has a big effect on sales, because sales by definition, is people interacting with each other. So if all that goes remote, there's a lot of things changing. And there's sort of 4 groups of questions Jakob and I are getting about this. It's how to keep generating leads in this new world. It's how to keep conducting effective meetings when all goes remote. It's how to keep turning these leads into deals effectively when this whole process goes digital and remote. And then an important factor as well to tackle is how to keep up the momentum when working from home, because it has an effect on things like motivation as well. And that's something we certainly cannot not cover. How are we doing this, Jakob? Did I do the first part or you did the first part? I don't remember actually.
You go ahead and knock out of the park parts 1 and 3, and I'll try to see if I can follow up with parts 2 and 4.
Cool, I'll do 4. Yeah, so the first part is about lead generation. That's something we'll tackle first. So all your questions you have around that, start firing them off in the chat, and we'll get to these when while tackling this. So the issue we're seeing with a lot of companies, customers of ours, but also others, is that a big part of their pipeline sort of evaporates because companies are not really taking big leaps anymore, buying new things, they're conserving budgets. There's even whole industries that are taken down, which makes that a lot of value in the pipeline goes away and it needs to be replaced. So that's certainly a first thing to talk about, is how to do that. Like I said, more active sales outreach is needed. You cannot just rely on what you've been doing before. You just need to dig into new channels and do more than before. And probably use some smart data, automation. And what I've been hearing more and more as well is really targeting very closely on the exact segment that you think you can make the most difference in. On the slide here, there's the main 3 channels you can take there if you're reaching out. Email still works extremely well, at least if you position yourselves well and use automation. Don't start emailing people one by one and then following up one by one, because in that case it will never become effective. On the other hand, don't go in the other side of the spectrum where you're sending undifferentiated spam to an enormous amount of people, because that will also do more damage than good. It's very important to very well niche down your segment. Ask for a very small first action in the email. Don't make it too salesy. Rather, look for the right person at the company to talk to you, open up interest, things like that, but don't start selling them on the whole thing. Alternatively, a channel that works quite well is LinkedIn. It's an interesting replacement for outbound emailing is outbound LinkedIn connecting or LinkedIn messaging. Sales Navigator is an indispensable tool there. You can do it with a normal LinkedIn, but Sales Navigator gives you a lot of extra filtering options and also significantly ups the amount of profile visits you can do in a day, which is helpful if you're trying to do that at scale. And then a third thing, something that might even work better during this crisis than it works normally, is picking up the phone. If a lot of people are at home anyway, they might be more likely to pick up their phone than if they're at the office, simply because they're sort of more open to it for connection than in a busy office. Then networking, that is usually done offline, cannot be done offline. Most events for the rest of the year, at least the offline ones, won't happen. So you need to replace that somehow. And here are some ideas in which you can do that. It depends a bit on your type of business and what you sell, which of those are relevant. But you can, for instance, start with answering questions on Quora that are related to what it is that you're offering. You can launch your product on Product Hunt if you have a product that appeals to a very savvy audience that looks for the latest things. This is the best place to launch your products. It's not press anymore. Press is only interested in big funding rounds nowadays. Product Hunt is where all the great products get launched. In terms of discussions with your target audience, Facebook groups and Reddit are quite alive nowadays. LinkedIn groups have kind of died, but there's a lot of amazing Facebook groups in which you can join the discussion, not start selling yourself, but join the discussion, make some connections, share some of the stuff, and then that eventually can lead to deals. Reddit is a really nice place for that as well. A bit more nerdy, you could say, to some extent. But it can work very well as well. And then sort of linked to that, running ads on social networks. It is still a bit cheaper right now because a lot of companies pulling back their ad budgets makes it cheaper in the sort of auction-based type of ads. So certainly consider looking at that as well. Facebook is some of the cheapest. LinkedIn is not super cheap, but it gives you more high quality leads, they'd say. And the other logos you see, there's Twitter, Quora again, and YouTube. A third advice I would give you is to engage in as many online events as you can, at least relevant ones. You can attend these events and connect with people there, which is slightly more difficult than it normally is, but there's still a lot of possibilities there. Or you can speak at these events, like Jakob and I are doing. Those on the slide, except for two of them, we actually spoke at over the past few months. So let us see whether there's any questions.
There's a question which had come in the questions tab, which Abhinav is asking, that is guerrilla marketing, is it ethical or unethical for increasing sales?
It depends what it means, I would say. Guerrilla marketing done the ethical way is ethical. No, I don't know what to say about that. I mean, it depends where you take it. It's like, should people email? Is that ethical? Well, if you do it the ethical way, it's ethical. Yeah. So I don't really have a great, yeah. There's somebody asking, Rajat from Learn Extra Skills, how many emails should be sent? Frequency. I would empathize with your prospect and then think about if you would be your prospect, how many emails would you endure versus what would trigger you? Standard in our software, we have it set at every 3 days. If you make a sequence of emails, or we call it a workflow, I would certainly not do it quicker than that if you're prospecting. Maybe even set it slightly longer. It also depends on the way you follow up and the sort of approach you take there. I don't know what you have as a perspective on that, Jakob.
I think it makes a lot of difference whether you where in the sales process you send out these emails. Plus, it also makes a difference where in the world you send them out and to which seniority level. So there are a couple of different variables that mean that you want to, when you create a workflow for sending out emails, you want to make sure to see what kinds of click-through rates and in general what kind of statistics you have on each segment, because what might work in one part of the world will probably have a different kind of impact in a different kind of the world. So, for instance, one of the comparisons that we often see is that what works in the US, where the sequences are typically more rapid fire, is that when they take that same sort of rapid fire sequence, that same sort of quick workflows to Europe, they start to have an adverse effect because people just aren't triggered in the same way by such by the high cadence of outgoing emails. So that's something you want to test for. It's probably something that's different for everybody, and there are a bunch of variables that determine whether you'll be successful or not.
Right. We have another question which says, how about lead generation for people into B2C sales where leads were generated by door-to-door visits?
It's a good question. We're both not extremely qualified to answer, I think, because we're both Salesflare is a B2B CRM, and Jakob is mostly helping with B2B sales, as far as I know.
I'm totally unqualified to answer that question.
Yeah.
We only help with B2B sales, and I've always ever only done B2B sales.
Yeah, same here.
And the third question that we have, and let's then move on, is sending introductory email to leads violates the GDPR compliance?
This is GDPR. First of all, is when you're targeting Europe. Secondly, there's a gray zone there, which is called. I always forget. It has a fancy name. Legitimate interest. So if you think there's no, it's not if you think, but you sort of have to think it. But there's you targeted your audience so well that there is a large chance that people that you're targeting will be interested in what you're offering. Then there is a legitimate interest to contact these people. What you cannot do is contacting B2C people, or for that matter, B2C email addresses. You'll always have to do it through the company address because it needs to stay B2B communications, and then you can go slightly further. But it's tricky for sure. The legislation leaves a lot of room for interpretation.
Yeah, so that I think there are two things to say about that. Is that I'm not sure about Jeroen, but I haven't Jeroen, but I haven't heard about any sort of SMB size companies that have been pulled to court for violating GDPR. Also, because a lot of the time, what is important is that your intent is to authentically help your client, and as long as if they feel that you have violated their rights, regardless of whether you did it or not, just don't go into a conversation about legitimate interest and all of that. Just tell them that you're sorry about whatever experience they had with what you sent them. So that's the first part that there is to say about that. The other part is that if you send an a message through LinkedIn, then all of that is void, right? Because all users of LinkedIn have signed the LinkedIn user agreement, which means that they can expect to pretty much get messages from anybody who is on the LinkedIn platform. So on LinkedIn, you have much less of a concern related to GDPR than you do elsewhere. Except, of course, if you start exporting the data and then sending email using that data, then you're back at square one.
And we have the last question is, what role does content play in your selling process?
For us personally, there is a few ways in which it works. So we write content to get leads. So we write content. No, actually, it has two purposes. When I write an article, it's both written in such a way that if I share it on social media and even throw some Facebook ad money against it, then it will be interesting for those people who read it. And on the long run, it needs to be something that if people search for that topic in Google, that they will actually click on the title. So it needs to be an interesting title. Then if they get to it, that they keep reading. So they need to immediately see that the answer is going to come in that article. And then it needs to be written in such a way that they actually keep reading, because the longer they read, the more valuable Google will find the content, and the higher it will rank it in the end. So these are the two things I always have in mind when creating content. The SEO part is something that generates leads consistently on the longer run, but then to also make it generate leads in the short run, we always throw it on social media, and we even will re-promote it after a while again on social media to up the SEO rankings. But then it goes into all our social media channels, including personal LinkedIn. Certainly don't forget that one. It has more reach than company LinkedIn, for instance, way more. And some extra Facebook ad promotions where we have different audiences. We have our current users that we show it to. We have people who visit our blog and our website that we show it to, but also we have prospect audiences based on, for instance, Facebook lookalike audiences to show that content to also use the content to get new people to get in touch with Salesflare.
So yeah, let's move on, Jakob, then.
All right, excellent. So, so now that we're stuck at home, many of us doing all of this working from home, but also secondly, now that we have been pulled through this COVID-19 period and come out on the other side, and everybody has gotten used to doing remote meetings, it's quite likely that that we'll see a surge, and we certainly have seen a surge so far in all of us doing Google Meets and Zooms and GoToMeetings and WebExes, Nair Meets and whatnot, in order to show our clients what we have what we are offering, and also just to engage with clients on in as much of a face-to-face fashion as we can. Now, remote meetings is becoming the norm rather than the exception. And the problem, though, is that they are inherently less personal than going face-to-face. So in the following, we'll go ahead and look a little bit at the pros and cons now. Some of the things you want to make sure to do as much as you can during COVID-19 and also beyond is that you want to make sure to be a little bit more personable, and the ways that you can be that is by showing people where you are and showing them around, because you'll be working from your home, right? So better than being worried about having your home location turning your client off, you can better almost show, not necessarily show them around the entire house, but maybe show them what the weather is like, and maybe turn the camera in a different direction than just what they have right in front of them. Just you trying to maintain a professional, be professional in front of the camera, because people realize everybody is in the same situation right now, and people realize that. And so they are more accepting of the fact that there's actually a real human being behind the camera, and that you can show them some things that do not necessarily belong in a spreadsheet or an ROI calculation or a cost-benefit analysis. And then when you are on the call, just don't worry so much about your your dog barking or your kids barging in, or your partner shouting something from the other end of the house. It is all what happens in real life to most people. And so people will, it's a way to connect in a more personal way with your client, and being casual about it is really what is going to give you the most points in that call. Now, then there are a couple of things you want to be mindful of, is how you carry yourself in a call. So you want to be careful with the way that you pitch your voice and this pace of the pacing of your sentences. So there's a big difference between speaking like that and going way lower. It'll have a entirely different impact on the listener's perception of the call. And you can also speak very quickly or take it extremely slowly. And those will all annoy or please whoever it is you're speaking with. So being mindful of how you pitch yourself, how you set yourself up for success in a call is super important. Also, do remember to ask questions of whoever it is that you're in call with. At the end of the day, it's really about them much more than it is about you. And that transitions us very well into the demo call, to where you're just trying to show off all the phenomenal technology that you have to offer. Don't forget that in a demo call, it's not about you showing off what it is you have. It's more about figuring out what's on the mind of your audience and trying to tailor your message to fit with that. So again, that's why you want to ask a bunch of questions and listen very carefully to the answers, and make sure to, when you go outside of the actual screen sharing. So when you just have the conversation going on about the problems that your client faces or your prospective buyer faces in their organization, you want to just take the screen sharing off, so that the focus can be on that personal connection between you and your audience. Because otherwise, that's what you want to break down, right? And so, and that's the same when you then move out of the demo call afterwards. You'll have the same situation again. You want to make sure to break down as many of the barriers that lie between you and your buyer from a personal perspective. And you want to get as close to them and be as personal as possible when you connect with them. So after your meeting, you'll want to follow up with video messages, in order to, instead of just text messages, and maybe send a text message, but sprinkle it with a little bit of video. Making a video is super easy with Bonjoro, Vidyard, Loom. My own personal favorite is Drift's video. Some of these offerings are completely free to a certain extent, and even moving on from the free versions in some of these cases can mean very low cost. So I would definitely, if you haven't explored making video and sending it to people, I would go and I think maybe challenge yourself is the right way of phrasing it, to record some videos and send it over to people and watch the response. It's typically really, really good. And outside of those, you have, of course, the instant messaging applications that you can use, different apps, the WhatsApps, the Facebook messages, the LinkedIn message inbox, both the regular one and the Sales Navigator one, along with Intercom and other chat like Drift Chat, and the entire range of other live chat solutions that are out there to welcome people to your website. So they are just examples of ways that you can connect with people on different channels than the extremely noisy email inbox that we just spend a lot of time having conversations about. There are many, many ways that you can reach out to your clients that aren't email, and that'll get closer to them, that'll reach them wherever they are. Think about just reaching people on WhatsApp, on Facebook Messenger, or on their LinkedIn inbox, which they always have with them regardless of where they go. So that is that. Any questions?
I have one question here. Having said that, reach out to people on WhatsApp, on LinkedIn. Again, aren't we like treading on a very thin line of permissions and invasion of privacies? Would that not be affected?
Yes. So that you have two questions there, right? You have one question being, aren't we treading a very thin line? And the other one is, aren't we stepping on people's privacy rights?
Yes.
So let me just see here. So yes, we're treading a very thin line in that we may have people have an experience as if we were treading, in fact, stamping all over their privacy rights. However, as long as you put on display your honest intention to help people with whichever problems they have, and if you apologize for whatever it was that happened, then typically people will, if you just behave like a human being and say, "Hey, mate, that wasn't my intention. I just wanted to help out, and I didn't realize that this would have this kind of effect, and I'm really sorry about it." then you can turn that around to at worst neutral experience for the individual that you're that who you've texted. And in some cases, you could turn it all the way around to a positive experience where that individual ends up at the top end of your B2B sales funnel.
And we have
But it is
one
something you want
question
to be
from.
wary of. Yeah.
I have one question too, Jacob. In your slide, you have mentioned that the casual is king. So this is the quite opposite of what we have been practicing for a long time. When we are meeting face to face, we have to be very professional, and keep things professional. But the casual is king in meeting offline. It's quite different. So do you think our prospects gonna accept that?
I think that in particular, now that we have our new glorious work from home COVID-19 situation, the prospective buyer is accepting it by being on the call. I mean, they're from home. They're themselves at home in a situation where they don't have control over the dog, the kids, the partner, the honking horns, and whatever, right? So stuff will happen. Everybody knows it, and so it's much more accepted now than it has been ever to have all of those unexpected things happen.
So we have one question from the earlier slide, and I really need to ask it. So Sagar from the EngineerBabu team was asking that how to start reaching out to enterprise clients while you mostly deal with startups. He has seen that reaching out to startups is easier. So is there any better way to reach out to enterprise clients?
It's a very, very, very big topic. It depends a little bit on how have you been used to doing your outreach, and how are you converging, how are you sort of transforming that into an enterprise outreach formula. What works really well is to play around with a sequence of approaching people over different channels. And remember that certainly in the startup space, but also even more so as you increase your the organization size that you're targeting, you'll experience that more and more people are part of the decision. And so your outreach needs to include more and more people as well, in order for you to have some sort of grasp on what that client is going to need for buying and for internal alignment and for getting things done, basically. But the parts that play a role there are a bunch of different parts. Some of the parts you want to play around with in order for you to have a sound prospecting sequence in the enterprise segment is you want to make use of email, you want to make use of LinkedIn invitations. If they're not accepted, you want to make use of in-mails, commenting on content, tagging people on content that you share, which is relevant to them. Sending, if you have mobile numbers, it's very simple to send messages on WhatsApp if they're WhatsApp users. Even sending SMS is possible. But the key is to experiment with the sequence that works for you, and this could very easily, over the course of months, could very easily be 20 plus step sequence, including all of the steps where you provide comments on content, you like content, you share content with them, and you tag them in content, and reach out on email and LinkedIn, and give them a couple of cold calls and so forth. But what works in one part of the world with one particular segment doesn't necessarily work in exactly the same way in a different part of the world. You got to play around with things.
Yeah.
Right.